Thanks for joining me. Today's tutorial is for Luminescence Deux. This is a piece that I've done as a demonstration piece of one I did earlier in the week using the same colors of blue. And these are actually alcohol pearl inks by Ranger on a black shiny or glossy cardstock. So to begin with, I'm showing you my work setup. The Scotch tape I'll explain in a couple of minutes. And the cardstock I'm using that you see there, which is quite black and glossy, is called Chrome Coat Gloss Cover. It's from Marco's Papers, and I'm sure you could find something quite similar. As long as it's a high gloss, it will work quite well with the alcohols and the alcohol pearl inks. The pearl inks look particularly great on a dark cardstock. The back side of this one is white matte, so not something you'd use for alcohol ink. But the piece I've cut out there is 5 by 5, and I'm using that Scotch tape just curled up in a couple of loops, just like you see there. There's 2 of them underneath, and they're adhering the white side down to my Lazy Susan. There's some stretch and seal over the Lazy Susan. You can see a little bit of ink from past projects, but mostly it just wipes up quite well. I'm using Tranquil and Celestial alcohol pearl inks, and again, these are by Ranger. They've got mica in them, which gives them an amazing shimmer. That's what gives them the real glow. Whoops, and that's my airbrush. It's connected to a hose, which is connected to a condenser, and that's what forces the air back up through the hose, and I release a trigger and use the air to move the ink around, which I'll show you in a moment. But as I was saying, the mica that makes up the shimmer in these inks really needs to be shaken around and dispersed evenly in the ink to get the best effect. So that's what I've been doing off camera, is just shaking. And I pick up the ink in one hand, I've got my airbrush in the other. It's set at about 20 psi, or pounds per square inch, which is fairly low. Very similar to what you would get if you blew through a straw. And that's another option. Certainly you don't have to have an airbrush to do this at all. You can use anything that will allow you to direct a nice stream of air, a measured stream of air, in other words, one that you can control, is the best. So that's why I'm using the airbrush, and it has no ink in the chamber. The only ink that I use is what you see that I'm actually putting down, and I apologize, I'm right out of camera range there for a second, but what I lay down in a couple of drops, and then I'm blowing that ink toward the center of the card. So that's my aim. I'm really just making an oval little pool, not too big, but a little pool of the ink that's something manageable, blowing what I can down into the center. And this one was a bit narrow for me, so I just added a little bit more ink and blew it down toward the center. I'm trying to get these petals or slippers as consistent as possible in terms of size. As far as their placement is concerned, or that they're exactly the same shape, doesn't really matter to me. I prefer an organic kind of in nature look, which is, you know, it can be, of course, look like it's really perfect, but in fact most things in nature aren't exactly that way. So that's the look I'm going for on this particular one. And as you'll see, it's going fairly quickly. My technique is really to allow the brush to direct that nice little thin stream of air at the ink and tell it where it needs to go. It does require a bit of practice, whether you're using an airbrush or a straw or some other kind of implement to blow the ink. Some practice is really helpful. So I do pause a couple of times and try to decide whether I want to add one more of those petals or slippers, and I decide against it because it would be much smaller than the ones that are already on there. And again, I kind of like that it's irregular looking. If that's not your thing and you like something that looks pretty regular, then practice and do it the way that you like. Absolutely. This is just for illustration purposes. So now I've taken the Celestial ink, I've given it a good shake, and what I'm going to do with the Celestial, and it's hard to tell the difference in the ink colors on the video. Once you see the still of this particular piece, you can pick up those differences in the blues a little bit better. But what I'm doing is filling in some of the gaps of black toward, we'll say, the toe of the slipper, and just bringing that blue, allowing it to overlap a bit is just fine. That only adds to the dimension. It's a great thing. So I would not get excited about that or upset about it if it overlaps, unless, again, that's not the look you're going for. And in that case, I'm going to recommend that you do some playing and experimenting and practicing and just getting the skill down in terms of how you want the ink to run and so on. I have, by the way, said that this ink, alcohol ink, it's kind of like herding cats. I mean, you can get really good at it, but it just doesn't always behave exactly the way you want it. So you need to be easy on yourself, because it pretty much tells you where it's going to go. You have some control, but not a ton. So at this point, I've pretty much replicated my original luminescence piece. And then I decide, oh, I am going to dot it. So I have sped up this entire section just because it is so monotonous. But what I've done is taken some Alchemy alcohol pearl ink, put it into, shaken it of course, put it into a little piece of packaging that I can then hold very close to this piece and dip that dotting tool into. These dotting tools are actually for fingernails, so you can sometimes find them in nail shops or that department if you're looking for them, for example, on Amazon or something. But I just look up dotting tool. I think that's how I found them. And I believe the set that I got had some brushes and probably 4 or 5 different sizes of this dotting tool. I've only ever used this particular one, and either end is, one end's a bit bigger than the other. And on this piece I've used both ends because I want to get very different sizes of dots. And I'm trying not to cover the black spaces that I've left open because I want it to look as though those dots are floating in front of whatever this is, or they're attached to it as an animal. Or if it's an outer space, like my husband keeps telling me, that these are sort of floating around in front of whatever this thing is. So it does give it a very ethereal look, and again, because it's a pearl ink, it is translucent and you can see the other inks behind it. So this still gives you a much better idea, and I'll just let you enjoy this still and look at it very close up, and thank you once again for joining me.